Good evening. My name is Laura Weinstein, and I am the Ananda Coomaraswamy Curator of South Asian and Islamic Art here at the Museum of Fine Arts. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the museum and to this program, Voices of the Qur'an. Tonight is dedicated to the world of Qur'an recitation. Dr. Kecia Ali of Boston University will speak to us about the roots as well as about the religious and social dimensions of recitation, after which we'll have 2 rounds, if you will, of recitations by 3 individuals from the Boston area who will generously share their voices and their thoughts with all of us. Our 3 reciters are Mohiuddin Munib Khan, Naila Baloch, and Dr. Kamal Youcef-Toumi. I am very, very grateful to the 4 of them for their contributions and to all of you for attending. This program was conceived in conjunction with the exhibition Sacred Pages, Conversations about the Qur'an, which showcases 29 Qur'an pages from the MFA's collection. The show aims to explore these pages' significance as masterful works of art, as well as to delve into how these objects are understood by individual followers of Islam living in the Boston area today. Each work in the show has a label written by one of these contributors. One is struck, I think, when walking through Sacred Pages, by the intensity and the variety of the responses these labels reveal. And I hope you'll all take a look at it. One is struck by this intensity of these responses, despite the fact that the pages are in some cases more than 1,000 years old, and often they are things that have been made very, very far away from here. The ability of these pages, of these works of art, these Qur'an pages, to convey meaning is clearly not blunted by time and space. I think we will find something similar in the program this evening. Qur'an recitation, which is as old as the Qur'an itself, is very much a living tradition and living right here in Boston. With great anticipation for this new insight into Islam, Qur'anic recitation, and into my own neighbors, let's begin our program with a talk by Dr. Kecia Ali. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you. The Qur'an is the holy book of more than 1.5 billion people, about 1 in every 4 people on the planet today. It was compiled in the 7th century from what Muslims believe to be revelations delivered word for word from God to Muhammad, sometimes through the agency of the angel Gabriel. Muslims believe that the Qur'an constitutes a continuation of a tradition of prophecy stretching back to Adam and continuing through the Hebrew prophets and Jesus, Muhammad being the last in a series of divinely sent messengers, and the Qur'an the last of several divinely sent books. Tradition holds that revelation of the Qur'an began in Muhammad's 40th year, about 610, and continued until shortly before his death in 632. About the length of the New Testament, the Qur'an is divided into 114 chapters, also known as surahs, of widely varying lengths. Some contain as few as 3 verses and some nearly 300. As you can see from these beautiful images, carefully calligraphed and lavishly illuminated manuscripts of the Qur'an have been among the most important artifacts of Muslim civilization over the centuries. And those of you who've had a chance to visit the Sacred Pages exhibit have no doubt seen far more examples of this. The text was first written with a very rudimentary Arabic script, more a memory aid than an independent text, to which marks differentiating consonants and long vowels were eventually added. For centuries, the Qur'an has been one of the few Arabic texts consistently written and printed with full vocalization. Despite this attention to the Qur'an as scripture, literally writing, for most of Muslim history and into the present day, the Qur'an has been primarily something to be read, that is read aloud or recited. In fact, that's what the word Qur'an means, recitation. Muslim tradition tells that the first revelation Muhammad received in the cave on Mount Hira on the outskirts of Mecca was the command to recite. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. Now, I wanted you to have a little bit of a feel for what that sounds like, but I didn't want to actually attempt anything melodious because I want you to actually appreciate recitation after tonight. Now, though some translators give the first word here, iqra, as read, it's better rendered recite. And let me give you a translation. Recite in the name of God who created the human being from a clot. Recite, and your Lord is most generous, who taught by the pen, taught the human being what he did not know. This verse plays up the close connection between writing, reading, and reciting, and between humanity and its creator. Qur'an recitation is important because human beings recite God's word, the word through which God teaches them, demonstrating divine generosity. Today, we're used to thinking of the Qur'an as a book between two covers, and it's true that it has existed in codex form for quite some centuries. But even with the advent of the printing press, and more recently subsidized copies of the Qur'an printed in Saudi Arabia and available cheaply everywhere, including from Amazon.com, and also available digitally online, both with and without translation into many, many languages, the primary way Muslims have interacted with the Qur'an has been to listen to it and to recite it. There are several contexts in which the Qur'an is recited. The first and most basic is daily ritual prayer. Though Muslims, like members of any faith, vary in their level of observance, those who pray do so in a fashion clearly established. The core of prayer is recitation from the Qur'an. Each prayer involves recitation of the opening chapter of the Qur'an, Al-Fatiha, which you'll hear shortly, and another portion selected by the worshiper. Worshippers typically recite one of the short chapters which occur near the end of the Qur'an, and which are, like the recite passage I discussed a few moments ago, rhythmic and rhyming, full of assonance like the short I and ah sounds, and repetitive consonants like the ending ak and sounds. These features make memorization and repetition possible for the vast majority of Muslims, about 80%, who do not speak or understand Arabic. Recitation in Arabic is so important, though, that even where Arabic is not the spoken language, Muslim children often go to after-school lessons or Sunday school to learn to pronounce the Arabic alphabet and to recite the Qur'an with the appropriate pauses and intonations. In addition to ritual daily prayer, during the lunar month of Ramadan, which Muslims observed this year during July, Muslims often attempt to recite the whole of the Qur'an, which is helpfully divided into 30 parts for recitation. Often, a paid reciter, typically someone who has memorized the entire Qur'an, will be hired by a community to go through the Qur'an in special prayers after the fast-breaking meal. Muslims recite from the Qur'an as an act of individual devotion at other times as well. Particular chapters are used for particular purposes. The opening chapter, Al-Fatiha, is commonly recited when contracting a marriage or before setting out on a journey. The chapter Mary, which tells the story of her labor and the birth of Jesus, is recited over pregnant women for protection. Yasin, so named because those Arabic letters appear at the start of the chapter, is likewise recited in devotional contexts or for consolation at funerals or in cemeteries. Those who cannot read Arabic will often listen to Qur'an recitation. Again, even for the majority of Muslims who do not understand the words that they're hearing, the sound itself is believed to convey blessing. Technology here has made a tremendous difference in the accessibility of the recited Qur'an. Although through Muslim history, Qur'an reciters have often been present at individual gatherings to recite, today cassette recordings, CDs, and now digital recitation online and downloaded to people's iPods have made a variety of talented reciters accessible to a global population. There are even Qur'an recitation competitions. In many places, including Indonesia, these are a very big deal, like American Idol level big deal. Haja Maria Ulfa is perhaps the best known female reciter, and she's won a number of these competitions. In competitions like this, and to a lesser extent in private devotion, there are rules one must follow. The basic pronunciation of letters, rules for stopping, starting, pausing to take a breath, elongating vowels, and so forth are things that students learn when they learn to sight read the text. Those who have formal training learn considerably more. There are two basic types of recitation, a plain and an embellished style. And I'm not going to perform them for you. I'm going to let Maria Ulfa do the work. She's more qualified. The first is called tartil or murattal, and it is a workaday style, the sort typically used in individual prayer. It prizes clarity and exactness. There are precise rules about how long to hold long vowels versus short vowels, for instance. The recitation may be brisk, and it's always straightforward. And I'm going to play for you an excerpt from her recitation of chapter 97, The Calamity.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Inna anzalnahu fi laylatil qadr. وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر ليلة القدر خير من ألف شهر.
That gives you a sense for what she's doing there. The second style, tajweed or mujawwad, has a greater ability for the performer or the reciter to develop a kind of individual style or artistic license in the recitation. One can linger longer on certain vowels, stretching them beyond the exact ratios prescribed in the other style. You can go back, cut off a line part way, begin again, go a little further, go back to the start, pick up steam and carry it through. Here, I'll give you a sample from this.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
That gives you an idea of the sort of variation between the two. So having just listened to a display of considerable prowess and being about to listen to several more such displays on the part of the reciters who are here tonight, one thing that's vital to keep in mind is that no matter the individual talent or accomplishment being displayed in competitions or in private recitation, Muslims believe that these things are subsumed in the broader glory of the text itself and also of the one who sent it down. And with that, I believe we'll turn to our reciters. Thank you.
I have to be honest, I really wish you hadn't played the professional reciter before we came upstage. أعوذ بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين صدق الله العظيم.
Following that is no better than initially. I'm the only moron who didn't memorize my recitation, so forgive me for doing my best. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قد أفلح المؤمنون الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون والذين هم عن اللغو معرضون والذين هم للزكاة فاعلون والذين هم لفروجهم حافظون إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت صدق الله العظيم. My name is Mohiuddin Muneeb Khan. Officially, Muneeb was never really a part of my name, but as is the culture in Indian families, I took my nickname or my family name, which created a lot of confusion amongst those in the community and those who cannot pronounce the name Mohiuddin, which is just about everybody in this crowd here. I'm a first-generation American Muslim. I went to grade school here in the Boston area. I went to college here in the New England area. I practice now as an engineer in the New England area as well. Why do I tell you these things? Not to make the research easier for any FBI agents that might be in the crowd over here, but to frame for you a bit of the cultural perspective, meaning, what is the pop culture environment that I grew up in? And clearly you are all familiar with the New England area, and you understand that as a reference. The reason I bring that up is because I was fortunate enough a few years past to go on the pilgrimage to Mecca, or the Hajj, and everywhere I went, you could hear Qur'anic recitation. You could hear it in the Kaaba area, the Haram itself, where they had the professional reciters. You could hear it as you're walking through the shopping malls, people selling CDs of beautiful recitations of Qur'an. You could even hear it in the camps where people were reciting aloud, and that was such a beautiful sensation. Actually last year, I had the pleasure of being in Morocco for the majority of the summer, and even then, when we were faced with all the stresses that travelers have to face with, 5 times a day, you'd hear the adhan. Right? Not necessarily the words in the Qur'an per se, but the words of Islam. So I bring this up to say that growing up in this environment, we don't necessarily have that immersion in Qur'an that we had, that those who grew up in Muslim countries had. I'll be honest with you though, I don't think for 1 minute I would trade any of those advantages for what I did have. And what I had was my father. Abdul Hamid Khan was the imam of the Islamic Center of Boston for almost 18 years. And I remember distinctly, as a child, those phases of your life when you consider all things to be a chore. And I embarrassingly say that when I was a child, I considered the 5 prayers that Muslims have to do every day a chore. But I do distinctly remember so looking forward to those prayers in which my father recited aloud. I had no formal training. I still have had no formal training, but it's my father who passed down that recitation to me. I think as I swelled with pride listening to my father lead prayer and just the 4 of us, I think of the days that he stepped up his game when there were so many more people involved in the prayer. And putting verse to voice in the way that he did is an absolute indelible image for myself. So as I got older and I went through those rebellious teenage years where you have very ephemeral convictions, I remember wandering from all the teachings that my parents taught me. Perhaps I was a little immature, perhaps it was just the time and the age that happens, but I found myself, as I got a little older and I entered college and I had the ability to make my own decisions and the ability to lead my own life, so to speak, even though when you're in college, you're really not leading your own life. So all of you who are in college, don't let that fool you. I remember getting into discussions or being faced with decisions, and I found myself constantly making the decisions and making the conclusions that my parents taught me. And of course, at the time, you never acknowledge that that's what happened. But sometime later, I would realize, this is no coincidence that these decisions that I'm making, whether they're simple little things like, abstaining from the involvement around me of alcohol and drugs, or more deep conversations like the philosophical lineage of the Abrahamic faith prophets and how that relates to people who are not necessarily of that faith. So as I was in college, I also found that I was getting more involved in music. I studied classical music, and I studied voice. And I also found that the music that I levitated to were things that were Gregorian chant-like. And it didn't occur to me until later that the reason for that was the similarity between Gregorian chant and the style in which the recitation that I grew up with was about. I distinctly remember one time, I was late in the college years, coming out of my rebellious phase, so to speak, and we went to a function where my father did the opening recitation, and he did the Surah Al-Mu'minun that I did for you today. And I remember just being in awe about and hearing that. And it had been a couple of years since I had gone to school, and I'd come back and I'd listen. And I remember distinctly again that surah really touched me for some reason. But I'm not an Arabic speaker. So I went back and I did some research, and I looked up the translation of it. And I think the translation's not behind you, but so many of the items in this surah are about those basic beliefs. And those basic beliefs were really what I had come to without coming to the realization that I was, because this was the upbringing that my parents taught me, and these were the words from the Qur'an. So, if you consider the religious renaissance, so to speak, of your young adulthood, I considered this moment to be kind of the cherry on top of the Sunday that was my religious renaissance. So, as a young adult, when you find yourself back in a situation where you have really appreciated the faith that you grew up with and are really beginning to get beyond the questioning and understanding the true beauty of that which you were raised, what do? Well, as a young adult Muslim, I went off and I did what, I think all young Muslims did. I married an Irish Catholic girl. Right? And early on in our relationship, I remember having plenty of conversations about the recitation of the Qur'an. And as I mentioned, not an Arabic speaker, we always had these debates about what were the merits of listening to the Qur'an or reciting the Qur'an when you didn't understand the words. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God, has given us this fantastic gift where in the music itself, or in the recitation itself, is this iambic meter, this draw that you have to it, regardless of that. So I was very proud of my father growing up and listening to him recite, and I'm sure he's very proud of me today, but I will hark back to a short conversation that I had with him a couple months ago when we were talking about this event. And I said, I'm going to be reciting the surah, and Brother Kamal will be there as well. And they said, oh, Brother Kamal will be there. Then there was an awkward pause. And the conversation was in Indian, so I'll translate the best I can for what the result was. But my dad and my mother in the same conversation said, you're not going to be after him, are you? In any case, so moving forward, what is it that I need to do? Well, clearly, I have a lot of work in front of me to learn more about Quranic recitation, learn about the proper tajweed techniques to recite things properly. But we've been given this gift of recitation, whether it's from my father or his grandfather as it's moved down. And if I can inherit 50% of his talent and 10% of his technique, I owe it to my children to pass those words on down. When I was a child, the Qur'an drew me in. When I was an adolescent, it brought me back to the straight path of Islam. And I have an 8-year-old and a 1-year-old boy, and I owe it to them to teach them this recitation so that I can hope maybe 30 years from now when we're all standing in this wing in a new section, I'm sitting out in the crowd, and it's my son that's up here reciting, and taking these words from this most miraculous book off the pages, drawing it into his heart, and giving it to voice in the same way that we've done for you today. Thank you so much.
ويغفر لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا واخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين صدق الله العظيم. I guess I just wanted to share a few reflections about the process of recitation, what it means to me, and maybe a very little tiny bit about the verses that I chose to recite. So I guess I want to say I am also one of those who didn't grow up speaking Arabic, so Arabic is not my native language, and my first relationship in the Qur'an began with learning how to recite it. And so I guess for me, like since then, you know, like I learned a lot more about the Qur'an through like reading the translations in Urdu and also later studying Arabic and, you know, in English and everything like that. And as much as I love and appreciate, you know, knowing the meanings in that way, there is just something so essential, so special, so visceral about relating to the text in this way. It's something that it's, you know, almost ineffable, something that I can't really explain. But that it's this connection to the Qur'an, like that is a connection to my whole being. It is, you know, a connection of the body and the spirit and the heart and the mind. And it's almost like when you recite or when you hear recitation, the beingness of the Qur'an permeates your being and fuses with it. And so the process of recitation for me is almost like hoping to and wanting to and opening to this way of being, of permeating my being with the being of the Qur'an, if there is such a thing. And I guess the process of qira or recitation is a process of communicating with God. And as Professor Ali said, you know, recitation, the first revelation to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, was Iqra, the proclamation or the exhortation to recite. And so recitation to me is so deeply linked with the spirit of revelation. You know, revelation is divine communication to the human being. And so the immediate response to revelation is recitation. In fact, even before the response, it's like when revelation comes down from the spiritual realms, there's something about recitation that is important in assimilating the revelation that comes down. And this is a bodily assimilation of the divine revelation, so that what is descending from the spiritual realms can be integrated into the material realms and can be absorbed and like into the body. And also it is a response to divine revelation. So then when the Prophet alayhi salam was receiving the revelation, he received it and then he transmitted it through his being, through the recitation. And I think there's something very unique about that process, which I'm not sure if I really, can touch the mystery of it and what it opens up. And I guess the process of engaging in recitation is almost kind of a reverse engineering, where, putting yourself, your body, your being in that space to recite the divine words opens up, I hope, like my being to receiving the divine meanings, the spiritual meanings that are present in the Qur'an in like so many different levels. And this is my experience in a way that, I'm not always able to explain, but when I recite, I feel more centered, more aligned, and things make sense in whatever way I'm hoping to make sense of things in my life. Yes, for the verses, these 3 verses are the last 3 verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, and for me, the first verse is, I think you have translations in your programs, if you wish to look at that. But for me, this is a very, I don't know, I guess it's hard to choose favorites in the Quran, but this set of verses are very centering for me. I just feel very deeply, I don't know, kind of connected to myself whenever I recite these verses. And so the first verse is, it reminds me of my vulnerability with God, about how everything traces its origin back to the divine, and how the deepest knowledge of my being, both inner and outer, is with God. And so it makes me aware of how deeply I am known by the divine, and how the divine holds everything. So it's a sense of, I guess, security that I gain from this verse, of knowing that God is there for me. For the second verse I really love because it's about the prophets, and it's about following the way and the path of the prophets. And to me, it's a little bit of almost like a how-to manual of how to have faith. How do you have faith? How do you trust? And, the way of the prophets is really to, follow the divine way. And so one of my favorite parts of that verse is لَا نُفَرِّقُ بَيْنَ أَحَدٍ مِّن رُسُلِهِ, which is that there is no difference between the messengers, and that there is no difference between the message carried by all of the messengers or the prophets. And that really inspires me and opens me up to receiving, to receiving that message again. And the last verse is more like a supplication to the divine, and I just, that's another way of connecting very deeply with God and to the divine reality. So I just love the supplications in it. Sorry for going over time. Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مرج البحرين يلتقيان مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان وله الجوار المنشآت في البحر كالأعلام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام صدق الله العظيم. My name is Kamal Youcef-Toumi. I live and work just across the river in Cambridge. And so these verses that I recited are from a chapter that I had heard the first time when I was about 10 years old while growing up in a small town in Algeria. And the beautiful melodies that were used by the reciters in this particular chapter and also their breath control in executing the recitation was actually the thing that attracted me at that time when I was young, and also started actually being passionate about, learning about the recitation and being able to do the recitation. I was very determined because at that time my voice, or actually was the sound was very nasal, and but I was listening quite a lot, in terms of getting the rhythm and so on. And then so it was not actually until I came to the U.S. that I actually learned the rules of recitation that Professor Ali mentioned in her comments. And so I used to record so that I can hear how I sound. The only thing is that I did not know what I was looking for, because I didn't know that the rules existed. I did not know that there were like a procedure in terms of melodies and so on. And I remember one time I gave a recording to a good friend of mine, and so he was listening, and he said, "Hey, Kamal," he said, "you're pretty good. You're following the rules of recitation." And I said, "What rules?" So that was like a flag for me to go and learn. So I went and of course found someone who masters the rules of recitation, and I learned from him. And as it was mentioned before, in terms of the recitation, you have the pronunciation, you have the liaison between from one letter to the next in the recitation, and also the sustaining a note for different vowels, different measures of time, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, 5, 6, depending on the situation. And then, so this was about the rules. And then some years later, I was wondering, how do the great reciters, they would recite, let's say, one set of verses, and then 5 years or some 10 years later, they can recite that same set of verses in almost exactly the same way. So, and then I was searching and then found out that there was actually another field of melodies, that are used in the Quran recitation, and there are 7 or 8 main melodies, and each melody has its derivatives. These are called the Bayati and Saba and Hijaz, and so these are different melodies that are used. And so, and then within that, you call it science or knowledge, also how to use the interpretation, or to, in a sense, in Arabic, it's called the taswir al-naghami. So it means it's as if you're painting a scene or an image, through this melody. And so this is, and so then I try to learn the melodies. I'm still learning the melodies. I see this the recitation actually as maybe like a 3 tracks that are run simultaneously. So you have maybe a track where you have the verse, and then you lay on top of that, let's call it a track of rules, so that the person follows the pronunciation, and these are rules of reciting. And then you lay on top of that another, call it a melody, like a flexible melody track, that is, and when you run them all 3 at the same time, so you want to make sure that the melody does not violate, the rules of recitation. For example, elongating a vowel more than necessary, and so this is how I see this. Now, today when I look back at the verses that I just recited, from many years ago, it was more, attracted by as I said, the melody and so on. And of course, now when I look at them, I see maybe from a different point of view. Of course, the melodies are still there and makes the person at ease and calm and so on. However, of course, there is the important messages that are conveyed through these verses. In the verses that I recited are part of a whole chapter that has 78 verses, and 31 of them actually are the same verse that is repeated, which is, then which favors of your Lord, will you deny? And it's repeated several times. And I think that this maybe one verse that is repeated is kind of summarizing the whole message from this, chapter. And the chapter also starts, by saying that, it's the most gracious and beneficent, that has created the Quran, and then, so he taught the Quran, and then created man, and then gave also mind and intelligence, to men. And then, as I said, looking at these verses, they're also poetical aspect and inspirational aspect in terms of meaning and so on. I am still learning, and I practice almost every day in the morning and at the end of the day, whether it's like rules of recitation or melodies or different narrations in terms of the recitation. And I thank you for listening. Yeah.
So now we have time for a few questions. We're just going to get the participants' mics. Great, and I can walk this mic around to anyone that would like to ask a question.
And so you mentioned that there are a number of different melodies which are used and that are used throughout, and I gather ornamented on. I was wondering, to what extent are these melodies specific to each chapter, or to a specific line, or to the form of the verse, and how elaborate the basic form is, and therefore how much is left up to the discretion of the performer?
Thank you for the question. So the melodies exist, and in fact, some people even combine one melody into the next, to form like multiple melodies. But anyway, so it is the discretion of the reciter, okay, to use the different melodies, but at the same time, it has to match the meaning of the verse. So if it's a verse that is has sadness in it, right? Okay, so then you would use a sad melody, right? It doesn't make sense to use something that is happy, right? So if and then if it is like verses that are like telling a story or so, then you would use the appropriate melody for that. And then within that melody, the reciter can be very flexible in terms of using his or her own interpretation in doing that. Yeah. Did you want to hear like two different ones? So no. Yeah. So here's one. I think so. إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات كانت لهم جنات الفردوس نزلا. So this is maybe more like a storytelling, right? So if I want to make it maybe more like a sad sound to it, it becomes something like إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات كانت لهم جنات
We can.
What he said? No, in all due respect, actually, that's one of the things that I feel I need to spend the most time with, is understanding the context of the verses that we're reciting. Again, not being blessed with the ability to understand the Arabic in natural form. It's going back into the text and researching what the text is, but I absolutely agree that it's critical that the proper tone and tense be put to the proper verses, right? Because in its heart, this is a message, not just a song.
Next question is here.
Assalamu alaikum. This is for Kamal Youcef. Sahab, your choice of Surah Rahman really, really touched my heart, because from all the chapters of the Qur'an, this one is unique in the sense that it reads like an ode, a beautiful poem, and there is the repeating refrain. When you talk about the style, the melody, the way of reciting the Qur'an, that is like the luster, the shine of the gold. But I think the most important part of the whole experience is the content, because as a Muslim, when in Surah Rahman, Allah repeatedly asks, which of my many favors will you deny? When I hear that, it brings tears to my eyes. So I think when you talk about the aesthetic of the Quran or the rendition of the Quran, that is very important. But the most important connection is the ethos of a Muslim and the fact that the Creator asking His creation that, will you deny my mercy to you, is what shakes you. And unless you have that feeling of connection and with the content of the Quran, the recitation itself is superfluous.
Can I tackle this briefly from religious studies? Because I certainly agree with you that the content is beautiful, and I really appreciated your choice. But the vast majority of the world's Muslims don't understand the content, right? And understand what they understand of the Qur'an through other means, but not necessarily by hearing it. And I think, of the people on this stage here, you hear one who doesn't know Arabic, one who came to the study of Arabic as an adult, and one who grew up speaking it, and yet all engage with the recited Qur'an in really vital ways and have through their lives.
Next question is over here.
Hi, I think my question's more for Kecia. You mentioned in your talk at the start that the first Qur'ans were more as a memory aid. And it made me wonder, how did the first Muslims then, did they think sort of theologically about why they were asked to recite the Qur'an rather than just write it down and read it by themselves? Or was it memory aid, or they think, oh, okay, why are we being,
So it's a really great question, and because I'm a professor, I'm really tempted to send you to read 4 different books about this. This question of the relationship between the oral and the written in early Islam is a tremendously exciting one and a tremendously productive one for scholarship. The short answer is we don't know. What we do know is that there was always a relationship between people writing parts of the Qur'an down and reciting. And there was an organic relationship between the two, and how precisely those shaped the theological reflection of early Muslims is beyond our ability to know.
So the Quran is written down, okay? You can read it in a book. But in order to read it properly, one has to learn it from someone. I'll give you an example. Just a simple example. A word that has 3 letters, khalaqa. It's like create in Arabic. So the first letter is a thick letter, kha. The last letter is also a thick letter, qa. The middle one is thin, tarqiq. So when you have a letter that is thin in the middle or next to a thick letter, the tendency is to make it thick. So instead of saying kha, la, qa, you say kha, la, qa. I'm exaggerating a little bit. So in terms of the training, it's actually best to learn from someone, right, that is reciting in front of you, so that you can see how they are pronouncing the words. And also the companions, of the Prophet ﷺ at that time, they also they did not just memorize, the words. They memorized not only the words, but also the way it is pronounced, with the elongations, in the vowels and so on. So, and in fact, when you take in a book of the, tajweed or recitation, and then you find one chapter about, how the letters are pronounced. So I read Arabic, I don't understand, because they say, ah, kha, ha, and they say they are from this point, and then they're describing how you pronounce it. I don't get it, But then when you sit in front of someone and he says or she says, the comes from the front of the teeth, the, from the side, and they pronounce it in front of, then a person can easily, I think, understand it that way. And then the other thing about the melodies is that even the Prophet, said that to beautify, the reading, of the Quran with your voices, to make it a beautiful voice. Of course, the content is important, as I mentioned in my comment. But I think, if I read, just, without adding a melody, I think with melody it becomes, better and maybe more attractive, it seems to me.
And we have time for one last question back here.
So, I'm glad with this question, because this was my intention to talk about, because I really think we missed it completely. We miss it when we translate. We don't really need Arabic to know the difference between iqra, read, and recite, which is, you find it in another surah. So iqra is the first surah in the Quran. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. اقرأ وربك الأكرم. Read in the name of your Lord. Read, and your Lord is the great. While recite comes in the Surah 3, which says, يا أيها المزمل قم الليل إلا قليلا نصفه أو انقص منه قليلا ورتل القرآن ترتيلا. So رتل القرآن ترتيلا mean recite. So we are supposed to recite the Quran, beautify it with our voices as much as we can, so a lot of us cannot. While reading the Quran, understanding this, it is in the first ayah revealed in the Quran, 1. And 2, the first surah after that, came as the pen. The pen mentioned twice. And when we talk about the writing and pen, that's not writing about citation. So if we cannot recite, we can read. And we are supposed to read, recite, and understand. Sorry.
That was my Sunday school teacher growing up, by the way.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.